Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I'm Mark Cashman here with my co-host Chris, who's always ready with the quick quip back McNulty.
On today's episode, we're talking with Sam Crewdson from our very own IT department here at Microsoft, a group we now refer to as MS Digital. Sam and team manage the entire SharePoint infrastructure for 130,000 plus employees, vendors, and partners. It's actually a pool of usage that is well north of 250,000 folks. So quite a sizable operation.
Yeah, it's a lot of people coming in, and there's a lot of sites and portals and properties. We are going to dig into one in particular. It happens to be what we call Microsoft Web. This is our largest internal portal, but it is available to everybody we just mentioned in terms of employees, vendors, partners. It's a central location for a lot of content, and it has had quite a life cycle in its lifetime.
As we call it, MSW. When I joined Microsoft 6+ years ago, for those of you who are SharePoint geeks, it was reached by going to the root URL /sites/MSW. But thanks to the power of SharePoint's new abilities to let you remap the root site of your intranet to swap them out, MSW lives at the core of the Microsoft intranet, but it is not the totality of it. There are dozens, probably hundreds of separate portals and properties to support functions in finance and in HR, and MSW is the glue that brings all of that together.
Yeah, it is the glue, but I also think from an intranet perspective, especially again through the lens of this is Microsoft's largest company portal, it's been the tip of the spear for what can SharePoint do to support at scale a very large enterprise. It has been at the forefront for quite some time. MSW, by name, has been the destination that Chris described, and it's always been that. For anybody who's onboarding, if you've been with the company for a while, you turn to it for X and Y, and it has also been a minefield of wonderful innovation. And sometimes it is because we are trying to do X, and Sam and his team are asking the engineering team, hey, I'd love it if we could do X, or I'd love it if it was easier, which has led to a lot of what you'll hear Sam talk about, this evolution. I want to hear from you, Chris, whenever, beyond MSW, there have been a lot of ways of people moving to the cloud. There was the notion of lift and shift. There's migration of content. There, of course, is just evergreen, start new. What's your understanding of when you talk with customers, or maybe in the Wayback Machine when you were doing this yourself for Quest or wherever? What were some of those early conversations when you wanted to take advantage of the next thing or move somewhere different?
If I really jump back in the Wayback Machine, going back to the OOs, back in the days with good friend of the Intrazone, Mike Gilronin, and a whole bunch of other folks back then, when we talked to customers, there was a consistent theme. And some of these themes still persist. And the theme was that we know all the right content is out there and people could just find it if they had to search for it. But why do people need to do so much searching? Frequently, the reasons for that were because of really hierarchical information architectures, that you would set up a company and say, we're in 3 continents, so we're going to have an Asia site, and we're going to have a North America site and a Europe site, and then departments under that, and all of these really complex and ornate structures. But usually what people were trying to get to was not just solving it with the structure, but solving it with how can people get an intranet that is sort of self-discoverable, that we didn't have the graph back then. I mean, these are on-premises days. So some of that personalized tailoring and filtering wasn't available, but to be much more intuitive and being able to make things more natural with where people find them. There were a lot of guidance that, it is perfectly acceptable to have a table of contents, to have a browsable hierarchy, to have people rely on search, to have people rely on link sharing from friends, because everyone has a different mental map for how they learn and discover information. And back then, 10, 15 years ago, and now, people still have those mental models. We use different technologies to supply those kinds of information, but people have lots of ways in which they grok where they think information should show up and most naturally go. It's been interesting, that's the way it was a while ago. And Mark, you've been on the Microsoft side throughout. I've only been here about half of that time. How have you seen kind of our pivot to cloud and our embrace of other technologies is driving those changes?
I won't try to claim that I was there at the very first instance of MSW, but being on the SharePoint team, you get to be a part of some of those discussions as they're thinking about taking advantage of the version next or the update in the cloud. And a lot of that was oriented around content stakeholders. So there are owners of MSW. Of course, there are a lot of consumers of it. But when they were thinking of, we first moved to the cloud with the infrastructure for the publication platform. There was the classic publishing, and that didn't change immediately, but it just became in the cloud. And so there were different models for development. There were some changes they had to make with some web parts that they had. And, there was, I think, that last mile conversation. You and I talked about it a long time ago on the podcast, but it was around, do we have a weather widget or not? And at the time, the SharePoint framework wasn't quite mature enough to just do it in the way that you would do it today. But that was a pivot where the team who owned MSW really wanted a weather widget. And so they definitely architected a way around it. But then it became core to, well, a lot of our customers are going to want a weather widget. They want a stock ticker. They want something custom that they used to have to build, into full trust code. And so it was interesting to watch the needs of Sam and his team, and he's really been there from the initial steps through the stakeholders, and then through a much better end user experience, which changed the game in the context of mobile wasn't second, it was first. Development patterns changed, content became very organic. And to what you said earlier became sort of critical was a lot of people, not just Microsoft, wanted a dynamic portal, not a static one. To build a dynamic portal in the past, you had to build a lot of muscle around the content, around the search, around the, you name kind of where you added the dynamic qualities. But to that point, because it was so hard, a lot of people would kind of throw their hands up. Now it's almost dynamic by default, and you have to build in the curation.
Right. There are more times than I care to recall where, I'd go meet with a customer and would be looking at an on-premises SharePoint 2010 site with the announcements web part at the root of some department page, and it would be like, welcome to the new accounting team site. We're thrilled to be, joining the portal, and we'll have lots more information here. Stay tuned. And that's the one and only announcement, and it's 2.5 years old. But because I think, especially in the on-premises days, content has always been king, but documents were paramount. And one of the things we've seen since Star Wars Day, note to audience, Future of SharePoint event on May 4th, 2016. May the 4th be with you. And the deployment of modern SharePoint is there's really been a much more resurgence into page content and making sure that pages have great experiences on them that look good across devices. The document content still matters, but the days of kind of going in to rescue one of those, abandoned amusement park intranets, basically saying, we're going to declare bankruptcy, we're going to chop her in, pick up the documents we need, and move them to a newer and better intranet. That kind of rescue doesn't really happen so much as reuse and repurpose. And, I'd love to get your perspective on this, Mark. I think one of the biggest drivers for that, I think there's two of them. One has been modern SharePoint in the cloud, and the other has been Teams. Really,
to get at the heart of what I think you are asking me, and where I think we see a lot of our customers leveraging, is accessing the portal outside of the portal. And Teams has this wonderful ability to add a page to any channel as a tab in Teams. And if that sounds, kind of our technical perspective, because that's what Teams allows, what it really allows is it brings the content closer to the conversation. And it also means you don't have to own the content. You don't have to remember a URL. You don't have to direct somebody there, to take them right to where you want them to be. You actually bring them to where they already are. You can see that through the lens of, hey, there's a page out in the intranet and I want to share it with my team. That's really easy to do now. There's also ways to design the page so that it makes for a really nice mini dashboard for teams, but not to require them to have to come to some hierarchical structure of a portal.
It's interesting. One of the things that when we were launching Modern Pages, we really wanted to do adaptive and responsive design for both accessibility as well as to be able to flow things onto mobile as a form factor. And what's interesting is, if you think about Teams as sort of an alternate browser for content that previously lived only inside of IE or Edge or choose your browser, Teams brings these other sort of superstructure experiences we talk about Teams as a platform, but Teams has its own navigational constructs. You've got Teams, you have channels, you have left rail applications, you have ways to search and browse things. So you're adding all of these other dimensions on top of the rise of graph-based technology to be able to construct intelligent feeds, along with links and social and adaptive cards. And there's just lots more ways to get to the information that people need. Anyway, we could keep talking about this all day, but I really think it's going to be much more helpful for our audience to hear about this from Sam's mouth. Sam has to think through all of these technologies, and in many cases, before there's any other patterns to study from any other customers in the world, basically be the product team's first customer to deploy SharePoint intranets at scale to 250,000 people. Up next on the IntraZone, we're sitting down with Sam Crewdson, Senior Program Manager at Microsoft on the CSEO team. So Sam, welcome to the IntraZone.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
Sam, it would be great for the IntraZone listeners to give a little bit of guidance about so they understand where you're coming from, because we have lots of people with the same job description as Senior Program Manager, but you've got a very distinctive role for SharePoint as being a Senior Program Manager. Would love it if you could talk a little bit about what that means for you, what CSEO is at Microsoft.
Yeah, definitely. So CSEO, first of all, so I'll work backwards. CSEO is our internal IT organization. So, it holds the IT function, and among that is the management and running of our internal collaboration tools. So that includes Teams, Stream, OneDrive, and of course SharePoint, which we're here to talk about today. So, that's the function of the org and my team in specific. Now, for me, what I've been working on for the last couple of years is driving the modernization of our SharePoint sites here at Microsoft. Moving from the old classic site types to the new, shiny, new, awesome, modern site types. And so that's been a fun job for me over the last couple of years.
I feel like I've put on my Sam hat a couple of times, but I have played IT on TV many times, demoing SharePoint Admin Center, all the things that you can do. But you truly have some of those real keys, in Contoso, Fabricam, and Northwind Traders. I get the keys to the IT kingdom, but you actually do that for Microsoft at scale. You are the SharePoint admin or one of the folks that has the keys to the SharePoint Admin Center.
Yeah, definitely. So my team owns the tenant admin roles across the various members of the suite. I personally am a SharePoint role admin. In my job, I get to make decisions and drive the processes that we're coming up on nearly 700,000 site collections internally, if you can believe that. If you add in all of our OneDrives, we're coming up on 1 million. So it's a big job, but nowhere better to do it than here at Microsoft. It's a lot of fun.
I wanted to ask you to chat a little bit, diverge for a moment, not into my usual fallback of sports, but to talk about 20th century literature. Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow. He has various people across World War II searching for the original German rocket, Rocket Zero. And in many ways, our intranet, our implementation of SharePoint, we're very much customer zero. And as much as we like to think that, and I've said before, if you happen to be a 140,000 person or so global software organization, Microsoft software and services are going to be perfectly tuned for you. But that doesn't mean they're perfectly tuned, leaving a launch pad even internally. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the role that you play in CSEO as sort of as SharePoint's first customer?
I think anyone who follows Microsoft knows that, we have a special role internally called dogfooding, where we take pre-release bits and we run them at scale before we release those to our customers, hopefully ironing out at least the worst of the bugs and hopefully the majority of the bugs as well before we release them. So that's one of the big pieces of our role here. And it's one that's been happening since frankly, I came to Microsoft in 2001. We ran SharePoint 2001 on beta. It was the back-end search engine for our home site, our Microsoft Web MSW home site. And we've been on SharePoint as a primary landing page since SharePoint 2003. And through every one of those releases, and this is the part that's relevant to your question, our role has been to dog food the new bits early, drive improvement into the product and ideally influence the direction. So talking with our product group partners, talking with our corporate communications partners, people across finance and all the different teams internally that rely on SharePoint for their daily work. We talk to all these people and we try to drive that improvement that they need back into the product. And in some small way, I hope it improves the product for everybody.
I think that's the one thing for our audience that we want to ground is this is not just an early test bed for SharePoint. It really is a fully functioning, well-used across all of the different product groups and all of the different roles and responsibilities and regions. This is a worldwide use at scale of SharePoint. But you are essentially building it on behalf and managing it on behalf of the business, working closely with engineering to obviously ask for certain things that the business is asking for and providing them feedback with what does or doesn't work. But if you think about that particular site, that one big nugget that you referenced, the Microsoft Web, in all of its iterations, I think is really what we really want to drill in on. And if from the view of dog food, this is the dog food that has been chewed up and spit out, and I mean that in a positive way, many times. Many times. As SharePoint evolves, so too does MSW. First, can you just give us paint a visual picture of not just what is MSW today, but what is it? So we ground in the scenario.
Great question. So Microsoft Web, or MSW as we've come to call it, it's really our corporate landing page. And so what I mean by that, it's our vehicle for our corporate communications team who manages our both our internal and our external conversations with customers and employees. And it's their communications vehicle to share news and information. Sometimes it's about releases and for example, we've had some major releases just recently. Sometimes it's about messaging that they want to share from our executive leadership team, initiatives, company culture, things that employees can do to improve themselves and so on and so forth. And finally, it's also sort of our jumping off point for finding news and information around the company. So things that employees need. So for example, if you're looking for guidance on HR issues, you can go to MSW and find it there. They curate a collection of not only navigation elements, so people can find their way to the information that they need to do their job or maintain their employment, but also it's our jumping off point for enterprise search. It searches all the sites across Microsoft. It searches, via search connectors, a bunch of repositories that are non-SharePoint as well. And so it's really a great place for the employee who's looking for something to go and find it. So that's MSW. It's arguably one of our most important sites and certainly our busiest site on our own intranet.
With that in mind, I was doing the math, and truth be told, I hadn't realized that MSW went all the way back as far as it did. And so as you've just outlined, it's 18. It's old enough to vote. Certainly in the first 18 years of anyone's life, they go through lots of major changes and transitions. Wondering if you could, and we have the need, obviously, across CSEO to kind of maintain that continuity of service as one of the tools of digital culture kind of throughout the past nearly 2 decades. Can you kind of walk us through, what are some of the stages in MSW's life cycle as it's gone from being a baby to a toddler to a tweener to approaching the end of its teenage life?
Yeah, that's a great question. Mentally, I think about it in sort of 3 major phases, and this will make sense as I talk about it. So the first phase, which I would in my head categorize as something like 2002, when we first stood up MSW on beta 2 of SharePoint 2003. From that point until roughly 2013, I can't remember the exact time we did the migration. That was what I think of as our full trust phase, full trust code. And so, for us at that time, customizing MSW, delivering the kinds of experiences that employees needed, required us to have software engineers and developers writing full trust code. We would drop that full trust code, those DLLs, directly on the servers hosting MSW. And in that way, we would, provide the sorts of experiences that our corporate communications team wanted to provide to our employees. And so that was the first phase. If I were to categorize it in a couple of ways, I would say very expensive from a server hosting perspective, because we had to do a lot of work to get those servers in place. And it was a lot of software engineering that we had to do at that time. Then we transitioned, so for us internally, we started our migration to the cloud in 2011 in earnest. And then MSW, I think, moved in 2013. I don't remember the exact date. But in that time frame, that's when we started the second phase, which I think of as, we did a little bit of a lift and shift, and we tried to replicate a lot of the things we did with full trust code with a combination of provider-hosted apps, partially trusted code, the sorts of tools we had at our disposal at that time. That period was, I think, marked by, there were some challenges, to be frank. The building partially trusted code, building, these provider-hosted apps. For us as an IT organization, it sort of undermined in some ways some of the value of going to the cloud because it was kind of difficult. And I hope that's okay for me to say that it was kind of a difficult phrase for us to build and produce an MSW that our employees would like.
Sam, if I just asked you a couple of true, false, kind of quick answer questions, I think it kind of exemplify the pain, which is certainly okay to mention because at the time it was what it was. And honestly, it was good. It was a great offering, but now it's just gotten a lot better. True or false, in that early phase, you're talking about SharePoint Server on premises.
Correct. Yeah. First phase was SharePoint Portal Server 2007, 2010, and so on. Yeah, definitely on-premises servers.
And from a feature perspective, we would have referenced that as classic publishing. You were doing classic publishing using the classic publishing features on premises.
Absolutely. Classic publishing in phase 1, classic publishing in phase 2. The customizations are the main difference, whether full trust code or, largely provider-hosted apps and the like.
If we stay in that Wayback Machine, I'd imagine like a really large architecture going back to all of the shared service providers, search farms, test farms, SQL clusters, you name it, right?
And one qualifier too, just in beyond the complexity to the end user, did you have to considerably build a mobile experience, even if mobile phones might not have been as prevalent, until the later years, just from a mobile perspective in the early phases?
Depends on where we draw the lines on early phases. I would say that somewhere middle of what I was defining as the second phase is where we started to take mobile kind of seriously. In IT, one of my colleague teams built what we called the site design package. And the site design package was meant to address some of the shortcomings in mobile, the shortcomings in classic around accessibility, which has become very important for us here at Microsoft. And so we had to build these solutions to overcome some of those challenges internally. And in fact, when you're ready, that's a great segue into what we love about modern.
I think it's a perfect segue. And kind of as Chris was rattling off a few things of requirements of a good architecture in the past, lots of servers, lots of technology, that, what you just mentioned, I think I heard you just kind of reference the site designer or the site design technology. Mm-hmm. Were there ever any of the connections with Dreamweaver, through the site design connection or anything that was a designer tool that, was sort of that last mile of making it look great?
Yeah, definitely. I actually don't remember the tools that they used, but we certainly did have at one point for a number of years a designer who was focused on building and building prototypes, building mock-ups that we could use to build the MSW experience. They did user studies. They talked with customers to figure out exactly how we'd want to build it and make it look. And certainly it was a very different time. At that time, SharePoint was, at least from the MSW perspective, it was more of a platform that we built on top of rather than a fully finished, ready to be a corporate communications hub.
So talk about that then move to modern. You had mentioned it as kind of a breath of fresh air for lots of things that you no longer needed to do. What did that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one of my favorite things when I get to talk to customers about our journey. So when I think back, what was it? The communication site came out in 2017. It was immediately apparent to us, the nature of the change. It was going to be huge for us. The easiest way I can describe it, then we can dig into the details, is this. So on MSW, we had to build, this might vary by day, but we'd have between 13 and 15 customizations on the MSW homepage at any given time. So that's effort doing design work, that's engineering effort, that's ongoing support. There was a lot of customizations just to make the MSW homepage go. In addition, we had to do some work around that site design package I was talking about, which plugged some of the worst gaps in accessibility and introducing some bare bones mobile experience, responsive design. And so if you do that as a compare and contrast to today's MSW, today, the MSW we deliver to our customers today, number one, has just 3 customizations, sometimes 4 on the homepage at any given time. The customizations we do have on the homepage, man, they're so much easier to build thanks to the SharePoint framework. The fact that, today, unlike the older versions of SharePoint, the fact that you can build a web experience using, your favorite flavor of JavaScript, whether it's React, Angular, TypeScript, TypeScript, JavaScript, whatever, means that I'm spending a lot less time, shall we say, finding SharePoint developers, and I can just use web developers to deliver my solutions. So if I were to sum up, it's a lot less work to build. It's a lot less work to support, and it's delivering a clean, more accessible mobile experience to boot. So it's been nothing but win for us.
I hear just in your voice, and of course all that you're saying, a lot less to support, a lot less to build from the get-go. Still things to be mindful of, and there's always things that the business wants that maybe aren't necessarily out of the box. And just in celebration, the SharePoint framework just celebrated 4 years. So it's still young compared to SharePoint, but from a maturity of a framework, and to hear you describe it, it's nice to hear through use that it's actually not only matured, because I think they've added a ton of features, but matured in that it's good for the business. It's a nice language or framework to build in, and it works, that you have 3 customizations that were required by the business, and you can do them and do it in a fashion where it is easy to support, the lifecycle management, all the goodness that comes with SPFX.
Yeah, definitely. And that's not to say that there aren't sometimes a little friction, between me and my product group partners and between me and my business partners. But certainly, I think if you look at the scorecard, the SharePoint team has really been running up the score on us. There's been so many more wins than challenges. It's been a very good transition for us.
So, Sam, you mapped it through 3 phases, and I think there's one 4th phase that's coming up. And I don't think it'll be a transition for MSW. It'll just be a new major entry point for MSW. And so for the world, we've just recently talked about Microsoft Viva. And one of those modules is Viva Connections, where if you stare at it, it is essentially a lot of SharePoint technology plumbed through on behalf of the entire organization in Teams. But I know we've got some early days of MSW as a Viva Connection, kind of outlet for Microsoft, for us as employees. Can you talk about that phase just with what you know about it? Obviously, the current implementation, as we're starting to experience it, in the sense of, what's next for MSW?
We've been working with the team on what we're now calling Viva Connections, of course, for a number of months. And it's something that we're really excited about. So it's number one. One of the things that's been great about the Microsoft in the Satya era, it has been the ability of Satya and his leadership team, and I don't mean that just as a cheerleader, but rather to say that the different orgs are working better, so much better together than, say, a decade ago. And what that's leading to is this major reuse of technologies between the different members of our suite. And so for us, when we look at the Connections app with respect to MSW, the way that it's leveraging existing capabilities across the suite, pulling in news and information from across Yammer, from across the SharePoint news space, it's reusing some of the investments that we've built in terms of the global navigation that comes with the app bar that we released just recently. For us, what's great about it is, we're delivering a whole new way to bring MSW to where people are working these days, which is inside of Teams, while not introducing a whole lot of additional work because it's leveraging a lot of experiences that we've deployed and we've configured already. I know the other thing that the corporate communications team is keen on is that it's, respecting a lot of the work they've done around audience targeting. We, through the navigation elements in the Connections app, it's showing the right information to the right people based on their role, based on their geography, based on how long they've worked at Microsoft. We're using a whole lot of different pivots in the audience targeting space to show MSW, not just in SharePoint, but in Viva Connections. We show them an MSW experience which is tailored to them. And so it's really been nothing but a win for us. And we're very excited about some of the things that are being worked on now.
And Sam, one of the big components of Connections is the SharePoint home site. And, if MSW before Connections was already, in essence, platformed on a SharePoint home site, it is the SharePoint home site for Microsoft. What does that mean to then carry over into Connections? You mentioned a couple of items that were really the benefit of building on existing technology or technology that we already had in place that just rolled into to Connections. What, if anything, did you have to restructure, reconfigure, change a bit of the home site as it was, and then, to make it come through as a really first run personalized experience as an app in Teams?
I smile as I say it because that almost sounds like a trick question. It makes me wonder if I'm forgetting about something, because really what was great about it is we did very little. The product team has delivered an experience which takes some of the things we've already done. It just works in the Viva Connections space. There's been very little in terms of actual additional work. We expect that very soon we'll push the Viva Connections app to every person at Microsoft. So there's going to be a deployment aspect for the app itself. But from a home site perspective, the thing is that it just works. The experiences carry over. The investments we've made over the last few years just accrue, and they blend together and really come together in the Connections app.
Some of my peers who are managing it from a product management perspective outward, I'm seeing them get some of those same questions, and some of their answers, even if they're simple and direct by nature of, not always having enough time to describe everything. One of the questions I've seen a couple of times with Viva Connections is just that. Isn't this just a SharePoint home site plumb through into Teams? And, if you stop and think about okay, that's not easy to do. But at the end of the day, yes, add the app bar, the personalization, and the investments of home site, even if it's, initial phases of deploying home sites at all. The end user experience as one of the core employee experiences is a terrific one. It's not an iframe. It's a lot more than that, but it also gives you just what you need in terms of being able to get all of that value in that single app, which, for more of our customers, as they tell us, they want that to be Teams. But certainly somebody could just go to MSW directly in their browser and get what they need. But to have that closer to home where they might be working more these days, is a big win.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the real, here internally at Microsoft, in the IT department here at Microsoft, I have a situation that I'm sure a lot of my IT colleagues in the world will say that they share. Budgets are not getting bigger. Headcount is not getting granted at the rate that maybe we were, 15, 20 years ago. And so, anything that allows us to do a little bit more without, having to expend a lot of IT resources is a huge win. Now, that said, we are looking forward to some additional features coming to the Connect space, and we're really looking forward to doing that work here soon.
And I think we keep it just as you said. There's some newness about Viva Connections, and what have we disclosed already or not. But the reality is, the biggest thing I think that we've disclosed for Microsoft Viva All Up that 100% plays into not only the full journey you've described, but just the where we're at now is the ability to continue to extend it. So whether that's an investment from IT, building out custom cards or connecting to other services, or it's the space where our ecosystem, our ISV partners, will build new experiences, connect to new back-end services, whatever it might be, there is that role to play. And I think, like you said, we're down to 3 customizations, but now we're going to get to a point where in this new feed that Connections offers, we want to make sure X or Y comes through. And that might not be a native experience, but it's certainly one that you can build like any other platform you would expect. So if we took a big breath in and just sort of sat on everything you just told us, if you could boil down, what your advice would be if a customer says, we're on SharePoint 2013 or 2016, and we have investments in the cloud, we haven't yet moved some of our major portals, what would you tell them, if you had a minute or two just to give them a little bit of strategic guidance?
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question, and it's one that's come up often. So the first one, I'll actually almost go to step 0, the thing I would hopefully do sooner than the one-on-one conversation with any given business or customer. And that's number 1 is, the very first thing we did back when communication sites first came out, is that we, gathered all of our major businesses, our finance, our legal, our HR, our corporate communications partners, and we got, all these people into a room, and we posed the question, fill in the blank to this, which is, I would move to modern if blank. We workshopped it, we talked it through. That gave me a really clear understanding of where they saw the gaps, the things that they felt they needed from the SharePoint platform. And of course, the expectation is that they'd done a little homework in advance. They kind of became familiar with the product. And then we had this discussion. The reason I bring that up is, a big part of our success, internally we recently reached 98% modern. 98% modern. It's been a great journey. And a big part of that was we spent those sessions early to come up with a list of what I would call core solutions that we needed to deliver. Now, in some cases, that part of that list, was shared with my product group partners. In fact, one of them was in the room for some of the discussions. And we use those to influence the direction and improvement of the features. But I think from the IT standpoint, the place where my IT partners in the world can derive some of the same benefit is from the list of things that the product group wouldn't do. I had this concise list of things that I felt I needed to go build. Everyone wanted, there was definitely commonalities. For example, a lot of my teams needed an accordion solution. So I built a custom accordion solution. A lot of my teams needed a mega footer. And this was prior to when we delivered one in product. And so there's this punch list of things that I could build. And by knowing up front and getting everyone on the same page, I could build those once rather than once per major portal. That's the first thing I would do is, if you're in that opportunity where you're at the start of the journey, have that discussion with all the businesses to figure out what commonalities they have. And so that way you can solve multiple, hopefully in one go. Now, going back to your question, I know you said 2 minutes and I've already probably gone over that. I'm sorry.
This, I think, is the gold part. So keep going.
Oh, great. So on an individual customer basis, I think the main thing that I counsel with my customers is let's try out of box first. Because of the way we built SharePoint in the past, a lot of our business partners would come into the room with this preconceived notion that they're going to have to do a lot of customization, a lot of development, a lot of engineering to build a solution. And it's just not true. What we've found internally as we've transitioned our portals over is that the vast majority of our portals can get by with either zero customization, as our own CLA department has, or with very limited customization. And those are those platform solutions that I built early on. And so thanks to the advances in the SharePoint product, there are so many portals around Microsoft that used to be very heavy customization that are now almost entirely out of box. I don't know about my IT peers in the audience. Anytime I don't have to do work rather, and I get the win of upgrading a portal, that's great. That's more time for me and time to do other things. So that would be my main advice.
Just to bracket, when you have this discussion, obviously it's going to be a little different for where is customer X when you give this answer. But generally speaking, we're talking over many, many years, everything that we've been talking about MSW. But if somebody's really serious about moving some of the larger portals or finishing up that kind of journey and approach to modern, what time frame do you usually set as a realistic goal when somebody says, this is what I want to do, and what it takes to get there? What do you usually set as expectations for timing?
That's a great question. It's also a really hard question, and I'll give you the range and how I think about it. So depending on how successful I am at getting them to try the out-of-the-box approach, then sometimes that timeline can be actually really short. So let's take MSW, for example. When we moved MSW to modern, and I think that was at the end of 2019, the MSW team, without help from my team, rebuilt MSW in about a week. A week. Can you believe that? I mean, like when I think back to the other transitions, when we went 2007 to 2010, 2010 to 2013 and so on, back then, those were huge lifts. Those were multi-month, heavy PM, heavy lift type of operations. MSW, because they're sort of a news organization, they didn't have to retain a lot of documents and necessarily a lot of legacy news stories. For them, it was a very easy lift and done in less than a week. Conversely, on the other end of that spectrum, there are some site types, where they're very heavily document oriented and preserving versions, and maybe there are some unique customizations that they need. Those can still take a little bit longer. But certainly, if I look at sort of an average, quote unquote, average portal, I would say that a successful migration from soup to nuts internally has been taking about 2 to 3 months, and it's been a huge win for us.
So Sam, I remember back in my consulting days, when we would approach projects, we would love it when there was any sort of upgrade, because that meant that usually resources are fixed, whether they're time or financial, and IT is always super busy. And so as kind of Microsoft as a vendor, keeps notching up the playing field, and there's more and more capabilities that come into pages and portals and the modern experience, I would imagine that changes the proportion of how you spend your time, even if it doesn't necessarily give you time back. What do you find yourself doing more of these days? And what's something, if you stop to think about, that like you haven't done in a while with our newer technologies?
The way I'd answer that, in fact, I'm going to go the reverse order, if that's okay, and start with the things I'm doing less of. As I think about it, there's this whole category of work that I no longer have to do thanks to modern. I referenced earlier how we used to have to do work to enable mobile scenarios. That's out of box now. There was some accessibility gaps I used to have to plug. I don't have to do those anymore. Every portal needs them sorts of solutions, mega menus, mega footers, these sorts of things, heroes. It used to be that I would have a different and a unique one on a per portal basis. I don't have to do those anymore because they're all out of box. And so for me, that's part of the value that's come from the transition to modern, is that there's this whole category of work where I don't have to spend a lot of time customizing what I would call the basics, because the product just does those things for me. The place where I've been able to spend that time has really been in the modernization space. So, actually going out and working with portals and spending more time, evangelizing and showing people how the new stuff works. And frankly, in some cases, changing minds, because some people had come to think of the old version of SharePoint as sort of clunky. It required a little developer time to make work. And of course, I don't have money to spend on a developer. Well, great. Spend a few minutes with that person. Show them how far modern has come and how easy it is to work with. And that's, I think, has been a big contributor to the fact that, here internally we've reached 98% modern. Is the product is so much easier. It makes my job, in terms of selling, getting to modern, so much easier. And so I spend my time on things like that. It's a very satisfying transition of my time. Before
I joined Microsoft, one of the bits of guidance I would give to customers about cloud is, you have whatever your budget is for this project, $500,000. You can spend half of your budget just having our team go in and set up servers and rack them and install things. Or we could take that pre-built from Microsoft and use those resources, to more hopefully tailor the experience to match your expectations more closely. And in some cases, it's a cost savings, but I do think it really improves the quality of the service that you're able to deliver.
Yeah, I would agree. And I'll even riff on that a little bit. And I'll say there's a whole category of things related to, the server business that I no longer have to deal with. I get DR for free. Well, it's part of the service. I get high availability for free. I don't have to worry about things like load balancing. Just from the core cloud perspective, moving to the cloud has been such a time saver for us. It's allowed us to deploy those resources to different things.
This has all been very marketing friendly. Let's just be honest for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever miss the physical server architecture?
Wow, that's a great question. My background before I was a PM, I was what we called internally at the time a service engineer. And so I was the guy actually literally laying down the bits and running the upgrades and attaching databases. And I was doing that myself and managing a team that did that later on in my early career. So do I sometimes miss that? Yeah, sure. But, after a while, it's sort of like when you're in your college years and you're going out and you're meeting with your friends and drinking and all these things. After a while, it kind of gets tiresome. You get good at it, and there's only so good you can get at running an upgrade. And at some point, it loses its attractiveness. So I think some small part of me remembers those years with some fondness. But I think that's as much as about the people I was doing it with than the work itself.
I think back in it sometimes, I took a lot of pride of ownership in both the fact that when you could still physically touch servers, you're clearly doing something that you get that tactile satisfaction from. And, some of the more esoteric bits about, designing RAID 10 layouts for SQL servers or optimum memory or figuring out for stretch farms how to get the latency set up, on the backplane so that everything would flow. I think there were more things that you had to do, but probably I do take some pride in the solutions I worked on then. And I think to the same point, and I'm so glad I don't have to do those calculations anymore.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I think the engineer in me loved, and I'll pick on a specific example. Man, did I love figuring out how to do DR. But once I figured out how to do it, man, was it a hassle to do the ongoing care and feeding. I think the problem solving was exciting, but I certainly don't miss the daily care and feeding that went along with a task like that. That's for sure.
Well, now we get to solve different problems.
Exactly.
I'm going to propose to both of you, maybe this weekend, get from our friend Bill Bear a nice, healthy 2010 environment and work through the upgrade and migration to the cloud of getting to 2013 to 2016 to 2019 and into the cloud, all with DB attach and all that stuff. and I bet it'll all come right back to you, and I bet you will love it.
You don't think I still have a 2010 environment sitting somewhere?
Oh, I don't doubt it. I'm saying if you need it, we know a guy. But if you've already got it, go for it.
I was going to say in there, you missed the claims upgrade in that set of steps too. Come on.
Oh, claims upgrade. Oh, wow.
Remember,
that's
I
bringing
just
back
play
memories.
IT on TV.
Full disclosure, a couple weeks ago, while sitting in front of a computer on the weekend, my partner, Michelle, looked over at me and said, wow, you're staring intently at your computer, but you're not like brow furrowed intense. What are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm going to one of my tenants that is still in classic mode. I'm setting up a modern site, flipping it to the home, running the PowerShell to set this up, and building a Teams app to register it in the left rail. So there's still ways you get to that sort of pride of ownership, I think, moving forward. But Sam, you do it for tens and tens of thousands of people, and I'm responsible for one. So.
Yeah, no, there's no stopping Microsoft. We're 24/7. We're 124 countries, and so everyone depends on us to make sure we get that all right. That's for sure.
You've been mentioning modern, you've been mentioning scale, and obviously we've honed in for this episode, a primary portal at Microsoft. But to think in terms of the amount of people, the amount of content, the amount of sites, the number of farms, from the past till obviously now more automated from the service, that's a lot. And I can tell you just as an employee, in these last, nearly 15 years, super deep appreciation for having the server or service be up and running, to have my documents accessible, to be able to create lists and pages and sites when I need them. Self-service, just that alone has been, such a helpful tool before it really was a thing. So kudos to you and the team. I only miss one thing, and I just want to get this off my chest really quickly. I miss that you're no longer MSIT. I get it. CSEO, and I want to say CSEO stands for Core Services Engineering and Operations, but boy, I just liked it in the days when it was just, you said MSIT.
Yeah, Sam, I don't admit your department exists under its current name publicly. All due respect to Kurt Delbenny, but when talking to a customer saying, here's what MSIT does, they know you're talking about our IT. And you say, here's how CSEO handles it. They're like, what company is that?
They always ask about search engine optimization as well. I don't know why, but
it's funny you say that. I talk to customers every month, and that's usually part of my introduction, which is, I work for Core Services Engineering, usually known externally as MSIT. I still use that all these years later.
You truly do meet with customers, like you mentioned, kind of on a regular and a monthly basis. But for anybody that just wants to organically go learn more about CSEO, where do you send them? Where can they learn more about how Microsoft does X or Y?
In IT, we've built a site called IT Showcase. So this is an org-wide thing, not just limited to SharePoint or to the collaboration tools, but really everything we do in our IT department here at Microsoft. And this is where we talk about how we've leveraged our own solutions to solve the kinds of major problems that every enterprise has to solve. So how we've leveraged Azure to run SAP, how we've used SharePoint to solve corporate communications and collaboration problems, how we approach governance across our various apps. There's topics for every kind of IT geek out on our IT Showcase site, and hopefully we can supply that URL to our users because that's a great resource.
We will certainly do that. I've many times pointed people specifically to some of the articles that are relevant to today's discussion that are from IT Showcase or white papers that you all have published. And it is always met with a thank you and certainly the guidance that's just built in for them to follow the steps or ask the right questions. So we will for sure put that in the show notes. But want to thank you on behalf of the Intrazone. And again, Chris and I get to say on behalf of us as employees, thank you for the work that you've done and thank you for the work that you're doing. But thank you for being a guest on the Intrazone.
Absolutely. It's been absolutely my pleasure to be here and to talk about the great and fun work I get to do. Thank you.
Up next on the Intrazone, events. Mark and I turn our attention to the wide world of virtual events. We're well into springtime, and so that usual excitement as people emerge from winter shadow and start connecting virtually, in some cases starting to make physical real-world contact, we're seeing it spill over into the crush of upcoming events. Mark, what are some of the events that we've been tracking here in our studios?
Yeah, so I'm going to start off by saying this one very carefully. This is an AvePoint event. And the name of the event is called Shift Happens. So I don't want to say it too fast so that we don't get, clobbered by the FAA regulations or anything.
And don't want to put you up Schiff's Creek.
I will bring my paddle only if Dux asks me to. To be very clear, April 20th to the 22nd is a wonderful partner event, Shift Happens by AvePoint, and this is aimed at helping you build actionable strategies all around the Microsoft 365 world. They will, over the course of 2 days, you're going to hear from Microsoft 365 experts as they share lessons learned, best practices, and help you ensure business continuity. So there's a lot to do with this new workplace. It's not just technology, and as we all know, Shift happens.
A week after that, the Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon 2021. Over 150 speakers, over 200 sessions, a dozen languages across all time zones. It is certainly around the world, around the clock event, brought to us by good friends Joel Olson and the wonderful community that we've orchestrated around that.
Yeah, so if you put on your headband and get ready for the marathon, literally the day the marathon kicks off, there's another event that my friend here, Chris McNulty, has been cooking up some things, so I'm going to let him talk about it. But this is the AIM conference. It's April 27th through the 29th. Any nuggets that you can share with some of those secret things you're planning for AIM?
Yeah, and you can learn more if you go to aimconference.com. But once again, we're back for the event. This year, they're going intergalactic because we're virtual, although I still think all the attendees will be here on the surface of the earth. But AIM focuses on information management. It is not a Microsoft conference, so we always love to go so we can learn from our Microsoft friends who are there, but also from customers who may not have Microsoft's approach to it, because there are a lot of ways that we can learn more and we can help educate people about it. So the AIM tribe is gathering virtually April 27th to 29th. Our own Naomi Penny is delivering the keynote for the event. There are a number of breakouts. We'll be doing some social side sessions, and of course, wrapping up with the AIM tribe ganging up on Ian Story and me. I mean, doing a live AMA. So
I think you and Ian can handle it. And when they bring it, you bring it right back. And it's certainly meant to be a great event. Might as well push and pull a little bit. That doesn't hurt.
I'm just going to say one thing about the event. We've been invested heavily in that area for the last 4 or 5 years. Microsoft events, SharePoint events, there's a certain way that the community goes. There's these rituals about SharePoints and so forth. AIM has a completely different set, but equally compelling set of rituals with one-on-one sessions, birds of a feather, like you have to open evening conferences with karaoke. It's just really entertaining to drop into a slightly different world, even if it's just for the variety's sake, with people who are equally passionate about the intersection of technology and business.
I am only going to request that if you do karaoke, please capture some video for me.
There was one from last year's event involving me and Jeff Willinger. I have traced, I think, almost all remaining copies, which in my saying it is an open invitation for someone to track it down and share it with the broadcaster.
I think if we know our friend Jay Willie, he may have a copy laying around somewhere. Let's cut then into May. This is the Teams Nation. You may have originally known it as its original name, Teams Fest, and you may have been planning for its original date, May 25th. But lo and behold, they've pulled it forward a little bit. It's now on May 12th. So the Teams Nation on May 12th is intended to be a full-day multi-track event. It's 100% free. It's 100% driven by the community. They're going to have 11 tracks, about 114 or so sessions. We're actually putting on a session. I will be doing it, but on behalf of Chris, we're going to showcase how the Interzone podcast leverages Microsoft Teams to help manage the show. Great focus on Teams, but it's a really broad scope of not just Teams features. It's all focused around usage and a lot of different scenarios.
Ongoing from March, April, May, throughout the spring, the SharePoint Fest virtual workshops. So SharePoint Fest will be returning to some live format later this year, but for now, you can participate in the virtual workshops. Members of the Microsoft product team and MVPs to learn about SharePoint, OneDrive, Power Platform, Teams, lists, and more, including, Mark, I think you're doing a session that they'll be rebroadcasting on SharePoint Fest.
Just really briefly about the format. I think they have great trainers. I'm not trying to include myself into that, but I just wanted to let you know that as a trainer, it was a great experience to connect with a smaller group of people, to go deep on the technology, to ask your questions. And they have a really nice breadth of content. So learning from the right experts and not have it be just a 45-minute session, but time enough for you to get a lot of information, ask your questions. I think they do a really nice job of keeping everybody engaged. And it's not too long, it's not too short. And hopefully from a topic perspective, you'll find something that works for you.
Of course, SharePoint Saturdays and Collab Days are ongoing events. You can visit them at spsevents.org, and we'll post the Collab Days link in the show notes because I forgot it off the top of my head.
We always put it in the show notes. But Chris, I think that's it. I think that's all we should cover with events. Moving on.
Nope. There's one more thing. As you may have seen, Microsoft Build is coming back May 25th to 27th. It's a developer-focused event, but increasingly, each of us is in our own way a developer. You can learn more through the Microsoft event site.
Yeah, and just to put a little teaser out there, I think when Chris says we're all developers, he really means it. And Build is highly focused on the developer that's going to crack open Visual Studio. But the reality is there's a platform play to a lot of what Microsoft offers. And of course, the ecosystem that our partners help not only evangelize, but build out additional capabilities. If I were to put Chris a little bit on the spot, I think there's a little bit of a platform play to Viva. There's a platform play to SharePoint, obviously with lists. There's a big play for Power Platform and of course beyond. Build is really a great opportunity to lean into all of that, to either learn above your skill set like I always do with Build. It's way above my developer skill set. But to learn the art of the possible, I think is always a really important part of Build. What is possible on top of this platform or these multiple platforms?
Yeah, Build is a place where you can hear our vision about how all of these different approaches, how we see them fitting together and interconnecting. It's also the way that we learn how you would like us to build them and fit them together. Always a great dialogue going at that. As always, a dizzying calendar of upcoming events with more to follow as we get into May and June. So if you're sponsoring an upcoming event or just know of one to feature in an upcoming episode of the IntroZone, please write to us and we'll be sure to oblige. Well, Mark, once again, we've wrapped up, I think, a delightful episode of the IntroZone. Thanks so much for inviting Sam to come in to sit down with us.
I feel like I've stared at MSW many times, and just hearing its journey from the source makes me reflect in such nice ways. If you want to reflect more about the IntroZone, we encourage you to check out our show page. It's at aka.ms/theintrozone.
And of course, if you're curious about other Microsoft programming, visit aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts or adoption.microsoft.com to discover more.
If you have anything that you want to share with us, feedback, questions, you can always email us at theintrozone@microsoft.com or scatter about on Twitter, going to @SharePoint, @mcashman, and @cmcnulty2000.
Word of mouth is still the best way people learn about podcasts. So if you enjoyed this show, help us help more people. Share the SharePoint love and subscribe at your local Major League Baseball park, now open for games, or wherever you get your podcast. And that officially concludes this episode's gratuitous sports reference.
And as I eat my Cracker Jacks and popcorn, we are your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris, the sports referencer extraordinaire McNulty. And you've been listening to The IntroZone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Microsoft Web portal-powered intelligent internet.